Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our IBM Authorized SAM Provider Offering webinar. We are excited to share this with you, but before we get started, as always, we have a couple housekeeping items to take care of. First, we will be recording this session and it will be distributed at the conclusion of the webinar in a follow-up email, so be looking for that. And lastly, we want to encourage participation throughout the webinar. As always, questions will be anonymous. So if you have any during the presentation, please type them into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. If we don't get to your question immediately, we will address it at the end during the question and answer portion of the presentation. That wraps up the announcements. We hope you enjoy the webinar, and I'll hand it over to Ron Brill for introductions.
Thanks, Alex. Welcome everyone again. Name is Ron Brill. I'm the CEO of Anglepoint. I've been at this role for over 8 years now. Prior to Anglepoint, I was a partner at KPMG, and I've been working with IBM for over 15 years now, all in all. Previously at KPMG doing audits on behalf of IBM, and now working with customers of IBM on software asset management and licensing. I'm very excited to present today together with Sanjay Saxena from IBM, who we've been working with for many years, and ask Sanjay to introduce himself. Sanjay, please.
Thank you, Ron. I want to extend a warm welcome to all the people who've joined, and also extend a warm welcome to some of our colleagues from other partner firms who are also participating in this program, primarily Ernst & Young, Deloitte, and KPMG. I've been with IBM for 30 years, mainly in sales, business leadership, management, marketing as well, a little bit in very early days, business development. I've been, for those 30 years, involved for about half the time in growth markets and half the time in developed markets. I've always been based in the UK, but I've held global remits both in our software division and also in our services, infrastructure services, global technology services units across Europe and Africa. Currently, I work for Wesley Mantle, who's our general manager for enterprise license agreements and software license compliance business worldwide. And it's relevant because what we are here to discuss today has both the support of not just my leader, but of our global leadership at the corporate level, because we feel that it's a very important area that we want to take to our clients. Back to you, Ron.
Thank you, Sanjay. And I think Sanjay is in a bit modest as usual. Sanjay actually originated IBM's compliance organization, starting in the UK about 15 years ago, together with David Eastwood from KPMG, and he's also been referred to by his former boss, R.C. Rolfe, as the father of compliance at IBM, and now Sanjay is leading kind of the next wave of innovation there. So great to be speaking with you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Ron.
All right, so as far as our agenda for today, and we're going to, both Sanjay and I will be presenting different topics. I'm going to go briefly over who is Anglepoint, for those of you who are not already aware, some of the trends we're seeing around managed services for software asset management, and this is particularly relevant as background for the IASP program, which is based on a managed service for software asset management. And then I'm going to hand it off to Sanjay to talk about the IASP offering. And After that, I'm going to go through what does the IASP process actually looks like for a customer who's in that offering, and what does that actually look like. And then we're going to have a joint kind of question and answer session. And as Alex mentioned at the beginning, please ask questions during the session. We don't have to wait for the end. We really want to make this as interactive as possible. All right, so Angerpoint is a global firm that focuses on software asset management and software licensing. And we operate in North America, in Europe, and in Asia Pacific. We have offices in all these areas, about 100 employees around the world. We primarily service the Fortune 500, and most of the work that we do is in the form of managed services. So it's kind of an ongoing relationship versus a one-off project. Some other highlights there is that we are not an audit firm, unlike some of the other firms that are participating in this program. We are not a reseller of software. So Angerpoint is really kind of a pure play consulting managed services provider. We work with multiple SAM tools that are out there. We have a relationship with multiple SAM tools, capabilities, and so forth. And then finally, I'll just mention that we're one global firm. We don't have member firms. We don't use subcontractors. We don't do offshoring and so forth. As far as service offerings that we have, we put them in 6 main buckets. From a SAM program perspective, this is where we look at assessing the current state of a SAM program. We health check, a gap analysis. We implement processes and workflows and so forth, and best practices, all based on the ISO standard. And I have not mentioned in the introduction, and one of the other hats that I wear, I chair the ISO committee for IT asset management standards, also known as Working Group 21. It's a group of over 160 experts from 24 countries that collaborate to develop the 19770 family of standards. There are about 5 published standards right now within that series. And again, everything we do at Angerpoint is naturally in line with the direction of ISO on that. We also do SAM tooling, tool selection, tool implementation, and so forth. Most of our capabilities are actually in that 3rd bucket there of software publisher specific. We have a team that focuses on nothing but IBM, a team that focuses on nothing but Oracle, nothing but Microsoft, SAP, and so forth, and multiple others. One of the unique things about us that our people who do this work are mostly coming from a background of doing audits, either for or on behalf of the software publishers. So nearly all our team who does the IBM licensing are former IBM auditors, such as myself. Our team that does Oracle are former employees of Oracle LMS. Like one of our senior executive used to be the head of Oracle LMS for North America. And so on with the other vendors. So this is where most of our people and most of our work is, with the publisher by publisher kind of specific expertise. All those first 3 types of services can be provided as a managed service, which is kind of that 4th bucket there, versus as a one-off. And there are other aspects and attributes of the service when it's provided as a managed service, helping with ongoing optimization and management and so forth. We also provide IT security, mostly as it relates to software asset management. There's a strong relationship between software asset management and information security. We can talk about it some other time. And we also provide certified training. We're a certified training center for IITAM, the CSAM, and other certifications, as well as mainframe and other areas. So that's briefly services of Anglepoint, specifically to IBM. I mentioned we have dozens of resources that most of them have background as IBM auditors. We've completed hundreds of IBM licensing projects and ILMT implementations around the world for some of the world's largest organizations. And we have a unique platform that we're going to touch on a bit later on called Elevate, which we use to deliver the service, and we believe is quite unique. From a managed service perspective, what we found is that it really is well aligned with the 1970-1 standard. That standard, and you can see a quick depiction here, is really based on the Deming cycle of continuous improvement, if you heard that term, or the PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. And it really talks about the management system around software asset management and how that is always a continuous improvement cycle. So that's it's never a one-off implementation. And then you have SAM, it has to be a continuous improvement cycle. There are 15 process areas that the standard talks about, and they're grouped into 3 tiers by kind of recommended order of implementation: trustworthy data, lifecycle integration, and optimization. Vendor-specific licensing is a subset of these 15 business processes. So there would be kind of 2 levels down from what you see on this slide. But again, this is kind of the overall high-level framework that we use and that we've found to be very effective. All right. As far as managed services goes, there's a really good paper on this that I want to refer to that you can see on the right there by Gartner. Stephen White was the second edition of that was released this last April. It talks about what's happening in the industry and so forth. At a high level, I want to just touch on some of the drivers we're seeing, because it is very relevant to the IASP offering and then kind of serves as background for that. So one element is that organizations are moving to everything as a service, and SAM has been no exception to that. And more organizations are getting comfortable with consuming software asset management as a service, like they do many other types of IT services and capabilities. There is increasing complexity relative to licensing, particularly with cloud models, IoT, and other things, which leads to an increased need to seek professional help. The rate of change has been quite high and actually accelerating. There's very high risk, potentially, if you do this incorrectly, and a very high reward if you do this correctly, relative to cost savings and opportunities to optimize, which again leads to companies seeking really professional help and recognizing it's not a core competency of theirs to try to do this in-house. Skills shortage, we've seen that for over many years, continuing to be more and more of a problem, which again leads organization to opt for managed services. And then there's economies of scale. And here I refer to, we have, for example, a Fortune 50 company that really needs a deep Microsoft licensing expertise for, let's say, about 40 days in a year, as far as performing the analysis that's required. And I'm talking about really the deepest level of analysis. If they were trying to do this in-house, they would need to keep that person as an FTE throughout the year and make sure that person is trained and up to speed. And they'll need to do it for all the other vendors that they use. And this is kind of just one example to show that even for a Fortune 50 company, it does not necessarily make sense to try to keep those types of skills in-house. And those economies of scale are even more true for smaller organizations. I think one of the things we've seen that as an incentive or a driver for organizations to consider managed services is vendor-provided benefits, and IBM is actually here a leader in that. And there's specific benefits for organizations that opt to use a managed service in the IBM context. And this is actually going to be a great segue for me to hand off to Sanjay to talk about what the IASP offering is about. And let me switch over.
Thank you, Ron. Before I get into the offering, I'd like to speak a little bit to the history as to how we got here. And without thinking of the client, some of whom are on this call, without thinking of the markets, how they behave, whether it's North America's, Europe or Asia Pacific set of countries, it's very relevant for us to sort of reflect on it, and then it'll be easier for me to speak to the offering and how it is to evolve, why it's where it is. So if I go back to a little bit of the audit world that every vendor now has made a tradition out of, it's relevant because it allows for intellectual property and its consumption to be accounted in a way. And most of the vendors have been doing it. And over the years, it has become so pervasive that it's begun to intrude on the IT operations of a customer. It's begun to not just be intrusive from a diversion of resource perspective, but it creates surprises. And all of these elements that I will speak to in a minute, Ron will speak to in a minute, we had begun to sort of see at IBM over the past 3 to 5 years. And I was tasked about 3 years ago to start thinking of an alternative, and I didn't want to build it in a vacuum. So I began work with Ron and Anglepoint and its personnel, began to meet with clients across the world. I met with IBM clients across the world, and I began to get a very real sense of shift in their sentiment and also in their expectations. That led us to, if I was to now fast forward, a combine of some other drivers. We began to look at the client data feedback of client satisfaction surveys extremely seriously. IBM does want to make every endeavor to delight its clients, and we were beginning to note that from audits specifically, clients had begun to send in feedback that was not always complimentary or flattering. So we began to take note of that. I met clients along the way, examined meeting a client in the month of November, so the year is not truly over, and the client has already received 12 audits that they've had to go through in less than 12 months. So obviously there was bound to be a reaction of that. And when we combine all of that, then the senior leadership at IBM began to really think through that why don't we have an alternative? Because we don't wish to be punitive as IBM to our clients. We don't want to be disruptive to them. Yes, of course, we want them to consume a lot more of our software. But just because our stakeholders want a way of accounting what happens to the intellectual property that we create and sell in the marketplace, is there no other way? And it became relevant that we need to have an alternative in the marketplace. So this is how we have come about to create the offering. And there are subtle differences. When you go for an audit across an IBM estate, we retain Deloitte and KPMG, who are our audit partners, and we pay them a fee, which then allows them to conduct the audit at a client. In the flavor of what you're now about to hear a little bit more about, which is our alternative offering, the clients pay for having to retain one of our 4 authorized partners. It's an important difference. I wanted it to be upfront so that as the questions will come towards the end, I hope there are no surprises, because the offering has some benefits, and as you go through them, you will want to hear about, is there a catch in all this? Is this some sort of a backdoor audit? Is this IBM trying to do a continuous audit? I won't go into the advantages of SAM. I will not go into the healthy aspects of the processes, because sitting in a Gartner convention last year, it was pleasing to hear Gartner advising its clients in hundreds in the hall to say that it is the client's responsibility to have some sense of responsibility on what is deployed across their estate from different vendors. Vendors have only one tool, and that is to come and audit in order to understand what was sold, whether it's being consumed as per the sale agreement, and all that is over or under deployment. And both have benefits for the client and for the vendor. Ron, may I ask you to go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
So if you look at the top bullet, I've just walked you through a client perspective as realized by us at IBM over the last 3 to 4 years. On 1 January, 11th of December last year, we announced this internally at IBM, and we brought this to the marketplace on 1 January 2019. I was tasked to lead this globally, and I took the approach of wanting to crawl, walk, and then jog and perhaps run. We're barely into the third quarter. We've done well from a perspective of market penetration without truly making any global announcements or writing to our clients directly. The idea was more to go out to a select set of clients. And the word select is important here because we didn't want to disrupt what is our existing way to conduct the verification, which is audits. Clients are notified months in advance. So we didn't want to go into disturbing that. We didn't want for the marketplace to react to what I would call something that they may perhaps would deem as not being extremely mature. There are elements of learning that both our partners and IBM has as we take this offering into the marketplace. It's very much ready for consumption. But even if I look back over just the past 2 quarters, we have had to tweak the offering from legal perspective, from how a client feels more satisfied perspective, what kind of variations they want. And hence, we've gone a bit slow to a specific set of audiences where we felt that it was more relevant for them, as it is an alternative only. But if you look at the next line on this chart, what would spell in somebody's mind what would be an ideal IASP candidate? A large, dynamically changing, complex organization, multiple sites, sub-entities, or part of a larger portfolio of businesses, multiple vendors across their IT estate to support their business. And they would be, I wouldn't say drowning in the complexities of even faster evolving software licensing complexities or the journey to hybrid cloud. Those would be very good candidates who would and who may want to consider working with an IBM's authorized SAM provider partner. The objectives from an IBM perspective are in the blue here. How can we provide to our clients an alternative to traditional license verification? Could we introduce the SAM processes in a very narrow sliver of the IBM portion of a client's estate, knowing fully well that a client has multiple vendors, multiple client estates, multiple sources of headaches, if you will, and we cannot be on a client estate executing on SAM, because then data confidentiality, client data privacy, or what other vendors are doing there and what the client is doing with other vendors would come into the open. We wanted to shield ourselves from that and shield our clients from that. And hence the selection of 4 partners who have very deep licensing knowledge around IBM middleware, and who also understand the key driver that this is an alternative designed to have a more delighted client. Our stakeholders' interest is only in ensuring that our clients are optimized, they're being given non-punitive terms to use IBM and purchase IBM software, and that there is an accountability at the end of the day. We feel and believe that if the clients have the processes that SAM brings, software asset management brings, then, and as Ron said earlier, it's a evolving and a continuous process that requires to be improved on a sustained basis, then we can help clients have a much better understanding of their consumption, which ought to then build the foundations of how they consume our software in the future and or how they transition to hybrid cloud. Ron, may we move to the next chart, please? I've discussed some of this in my earlier what the client perspectives are, but if you look at the top bucket here, the hopper, you will recognize some of the challenges, especially if you're a client of IBM software. You will see that over and under deployment occurs routinely. ILMT has been a challenging tool to install, configure, and then get it to report. However, we rely on that and we continue to develop that. The other complex elements, of course, remain as understanding entitlements, understanding associated terms, and then looking at the PVU or the non-PVU elements of the estate. Every company has not made investments in SAM, software asset management. They don't have the resources. And the one at the bottom, which is a very important one, which is risk of large unbudgeted settlements. This can derail very, very large relationships, very small relationships, relationships of all sizes. No CFO would like a surprise on their table. No CIO would like to demonstrate that they don't have the adequate controls. But however, when you go through an audit as a customer, there can be scope for surprise, and it can result in unpleasant conversations, both inside the corporation of a customer and or with or with one of their vendors. And if you look below that, what IBM engages, it's a SAM provider partner, of which there are 4 worldwide, and we don't intend to widen the net around that at this moment in time. Then you will look at the gray section, which is baseline, and you have one which is the ongoing piece. So you establish the baseline, and then how you optimize, manage, and run is the ongoing phase. And typically, the way this works is, if you can go to the next page, Ron, is that each client who is selected or invited at the moment to participate in this alternative offering, to consider if they wish to participate, they have a choice of going to 4 partners. There's Deloitte, KPMG, who they also know as our auditors, but they have deep and proven skills in IBM licensing. But in this instance, they don't get to work for IBM, they work for IBM's client. And then you have 2 more. One is our host today, Anglepoint, and you have Ernst & Young. The reason why this is important is that Ron alluded earlier to the descriptions of Anglepoint, and he mentioned that neither are we resellers and neither do we do anything else. So in that way, I think it's a salute to Ron's leadership and the creation of Anglepoint almost 10 years ago. They have carved out a niche in the marketplace for which now they are extremely well renowned and are almost market leaders, if I could say that. Once a client chooses their IASP, And let's assume that in this instance, it's angle point. And you go to the previous chart and you saw that there will be an effort put in to establish the baseline, and then you'll be allowed, taken through the process of a managed service. In this entire arrangement, there are two operating documents. One is an IASP agreement that our customer signs with IBM. And then there is a statement of work that our customer signs with one of the four IASPs, in this instance, Angle Point. And as this work unfolds, all this reporting obligations are to be met. The Angle Point serves the client in terms of the provisioning of reports, provisioning of everything that they do technically on an estate. They do not discuss any of the information or reports with IBM. It's the customer who has signed the IBM's IASP agreement is then obligated, once they agree with their IASP's reporting, to onward send IBM that periodic report. Whether it's quarterly or 6 months is something that we discuss with our clients. We prefer it to be quarterly, but that's how this operates. And as you can see, there are no changes to your software agreements, T's and C's. And this agreement is provided to our clients for a 12, 24, or 36-month period. Maybe move to the next chart, Ron. You might be wondering, so what truly commercially is in it for us as a customer of IBM software? On the top is exemption from a verification review. So for the duration of the time that you choose to be under the managed services of Angle Point, as an IASP, you will not be audited. That's number one. Then if you go down, you see subcapacity licensing. Angle Point will ensure that your installation is optimized so that it is compliant for subcapacity licensing and is therefore assessed accordingly. The discussion of full capacity goes away under the auspices of the IASP offering, which I think is a very big consideration commercially. You also, as a customer, don't have to pay look back, and the 2 years of back maintenance that typically gets paid as part of an audit settlement is taken off the table. The next item is commercial pricing, and that means there is nothing punitive to be had if you happen to be short on licenses. You simply make good by buying from your existing reseller on the prices that you're used to purchasing from your existing reseller. The rest are benefits that go with the software asset management. You have optimization of licenses. We don't speak here of the security dimensions, cyber dimensions, but they all get a benefit because your renewals are timely. You know what's where across your estate. You have better controls, both financial and technical. And you are being served by a partner who is actually an expert on licensing. And if you extrapolate this thinking that we bring to the marketplace as IBM, and if you are at the receiving end of such a service, and if you are delighted with what Angle Point provides you with as service across the IBM estate, there is nothing to stop you from extending and extrapolating the value of that service into saying to Angle Point, would you manage our Microsoft deployment? Would you manage our Oracle deployments? Would you manage our SAP, and so on? So there are true benefits to be had from this. And these are not theoretical benefits that I'm speaking to. I'm speaking to the subject after having spoken with more than 100 clients across the world who are global names, who are who's who names, and a lot of them are being served by Angle Point. And this is exactly how the service has expanded at that client, and or this is how the client has begun to see the benefits as you see them on this chart. I think that would be the time for me to hand back to you, Ron. If I have missed out on anything, then I'm hoping that you will cover it off. And if there are questions, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Great, thank you, Sanjay. Again, if there are any questions, feel free to submit them through the chat. And we can answer them as we go or at the end. I'm sure there's a lot more details that could be discussed, but I think this was a great overview of what IBM is thinking here. So thank you, Sanjay. I'll continue just to give you a flavor for what the process actually looks like for a customer who's elected to participate in this offering. And this would naturally have an angle point flavor to it as far as how we would go about it. First of all, just to clarify, and Sanjay touched on that, when we are engaged by one of our clients for a managed service, whether it's under this program or any other, we work only for our client. We do not work for IBM. Anglepoint doesn't work for IBM regardless, unlike the audit firms and so forth. We work only for our clients. We do not report anything to IBM. There's no expectation, official or unofficial, that we will report anything to IBM. As Sanjay had mentioned as well, we work for our client. We provide our deliverables to our client. Our client then may be required to provide certain updates or periodic reporting or whatnot to IBM, but then that is between our client and IBM, how they choose to use our deliverable. Nothing comes from Anglepoint. I just want to make sure that's perfectly clear. And that's, of course, also governed through NDAs and so forth, but that's kind of just on the legal side. And we can put aside for the moment, but from a business perspective, this is how the relationship works. From a kind of a scope of services perspective, to qualify for the IASP program, it needs to be a managed service, not a one-off project. And so those are the two kind of buckets there on the right side, which is a managed service that includes just the IBM estate, or a managed service that includes other publishers as well. A managed service means that we're engaged on an ongoing basis to provide and refresh the reports, check on the health of ILMT or an alternative subcapacity tool that's been approved, and work on an ongoing basis to optimize the environment. So that kind of ongoing managed service component is a requirement to be in the IASP program, as Sanjay had mentioned. In order to get to that point, there are kind of setup steps that need to take place, and we've listed 3 of them here. First of all, there's the SAM tool implementation. Again, it would typically be ILMT or Big Fix or any other tool that's been approved by IBM and for which an amendment has been signed between IBM and the customer, for example, Flexera. So there could be 2 scenarios that we typically see when we engage. Either they have no tool deployed, in which case we will work with our client to deploy the tool, or they have a tool deployed but it's not configured correctly. Some of the agents are not reporting back healthy or are missing. Bundling is not done correctly, and so forth. So there's usually a lot of work to be done to get it to a point where it meets a certain minimal level of quality and reports data that's completely inaccurate. So tool implementation is usually the first step, and then there's, as I touched on, configuring the tool to report correctly. Bundling is one good example of that. Which we go through that process to ensure that the tool is reporting correctly. And then following that, there is the first baseline. And the first baseline is particularly important. This is where we look at overall entitlements that the client has with IBM on PVU and non-PVU. So that includes the entire IBM estate, including Z mainframe, if there is any, and so forth. And then we will look at all the consumption of licenses across the estate. So on the PVU side, that information will be coming from ILMTIR or another approved tool. For the non-PVU, it'll be the result of other procedures that we will perform that I'm going to touch on in a bit. And then we reconcile all of that, all the license entitlements and all the license consumption information, and then we identify instances of under deployment, which would point to optimization opportunities, and we will identify areas of over deployment, or areas where the client is not in compliance with the software agreements, and so forth. So that's kind of the process of the baseline. Again, it's obviously dependent on the first two steps. We call that report an ELP, effective licensing position, but essentially what it is just a reconciliation of entitlements to deployments. So that's kind of part of the initial setup. And then on the ongoing basis, we just continue to ensure the configuration and optimization and health of the tools, and continue to refresh the ELP on a regular basis, and provide other services kind of day-to-day related to software asset management that have the IBM scope in it. And some of those services would be related to ongoing optimization, supporting renewals, supporting procurement, supporting other stakeholders within the organization, dealing with M&A activities, acquisitions, divestitures, and so forth relative to license entitlements and other steps, and kind of the day-to-day of supporting the client in software asset management as it relates to either just IBM or multiple publishers. This couple of simple sample timelines, and of course the timelines can actually vary, but it kind of give you a flavor for what some of the steps are in setting up an ILMT. The planning phase, we build the server first and push out the agents. There's quite a bit of work on data classification and validations and so forth. That's kind of some sample steps there. On the baseline, we set up our tool Elevate that I'm going to touch on in a minute. There's work on the ILMT or the PVU side, the processor value unit side, and most of that involves bundling, as I touched on. And then on the non-PVU side, there are other procedures that we perform to collect the data and then analyze it. There's data validation phase, where we ensure the completeness and accuracy of the data by triangulating it with other sources and working with our client to ensure completeness and accuracy. And then there's the reporting that we work on together with our client. These are just kind of a couple of sample timelines. We heavily use the platform that I've mentioned, Elevate, and I want to touch on what that includes, because that's a key part of the client experience that goes through this process with us. Elevate is kind of in-house platform that we've been developing over many years. It's now being used by hundreds of clients around the world on a day-to-day basis, including by multiple Fortune Global 100 companies as we speak. Essentially, it has three main components. There's a project management component that deals with who does what by when, handles all the tasks that are involved in software asset management, data collection, so forth, timelines, and everything that comes with that. It's a platform that's used to exchange information between Anglepoint and our client. So instead of sending data files or any data by email or any other means that are less efficient and less secure, it's using this platform, a secure platform. There's the platform itself, by the way, it's hosted in the cloud. It's actually hosted in Europe. There's no client to install. It's all accessed through a browser, and it has the highest level of encryption and both in transit and storage and so forth from that perspective. From a content perspective, again, just talking about IBM for the moment, we have hundreds of non-PVU methodologies that are built into the tool. These are hundreds of IBM's most common non-PVU products that we see, that we work with clients on, and it automates the various data collection steps that are involved there. There are detailed instructions and videos and so forth. And there's also scripts and other capabilities that are built into and could be accessed from the tool. And this is just for IBM. The tool also covers multiple other publishers with Oracle, Microsoft, and many others in a similar. So there's a lot of knowledge within that tool. Again, the tool is not coming to compete with SAM tools. Commercial SAM tools. It's really meant to facilitate the service delivery and the analysis of data. It can actually pull data from various SAM tools and just complete them in areas where additional steps are required. And then there are data processing capabilities that are fairly strong within the tool. IBM bundling being one of them. I'm going to touch on that in a minute as well. That's kind of very high level of what I love it. Just a couple of quick screenshots. This is just from a project delivery. Again, it covers tasks, users, administrators within the organization get their own user accounts. They get their own tasks. They upload the data. They have the instructions. Everything is right there within the environment. From an ILMT bundling perspective, for those of you who are familiar with what that involves, it's a pretty tedious process. If you're doing it within ILMT native, even a relatively small size or medium sized organization would have thousands of lines. They need to go line by line and pull a pull down menu for each line and identify the right products within that pull down menu to bundle it with. It can take weeks and months for a larger organization to complete that process. Again, line by line, you have to know what you're doing. There's simply no way you can complete that process without a certain amount of human error. That human error could also be quite expensive. What the tool does, it brings a lot of knowledge and helps automate that process by using ASP, using other knowledge and rules that we've built here based on our experience. At the end, though, everything is brought to a client's decision to accept or reject what the analysis is showing. But this is a much easier step to do than having to actually do the bundling decisions line by line. But again, everything is still controlled by our consultants as well as by the client at the end, but it really helps take a process that could take weeks and months and bring it back down to days and hours. That's the bundling aspect within ILMT. On the non-PVU side, as I mentioned, there are hundreds of non-PVU methodologies that are built into the tool that kind of walk through step by step what needs to be collected. Go to this console, go to this screen, pull this report, upload it this way to elevate and so forth, push this button. And so there's all these detailed tasks that could be repeated there by the admins that it's assigned to. It controls timelines and so forth and everything else. All right, so that's really the high level how the process looks like. I want to touch on the benefits before we address the questions. And again, I'm touching on the benefits. Sanjay already touched on this. I want to do that again, kind of as a recap and give it maybe a slightly different flavor to it. So we mentioned audit exception. That goes without saying. Audits take a long time to complete. Even if there are no compliance issues at the end, it's still potentially a business disruption. Your key resources have to be to do this in addition to their day job, supporting the business, and which is certainly not ideal. And so forth, we avoid that element of a business disruption. Taking full capacity off the table Sanjay mentioned, is a huge benefit. Typically, if you've not had ILMT, for example, for at least the required 2 years on a machine, that machine is potentially subject to full capacity pricing. And that is kind of a machine-by-machine decision within the organization that could lead to a huge exposure here that's just taken off the table. Other commercial benefits that Sanjay touched on, back support or other punitive charges. You get to have the normal level of discounts. You get to transact through your normal reseller, whoever that may be. You get to optimize your environment. IBM allows you to perform certain optimizations prior to reporting to IBM. For example, if within this program, for example, if you have deployed certain products by accident, they've never been used, IBM would allow you to do that optimization prior to reporting to IBM, which in my mind, as a former auditor, I think that's huge for clients. And then you get the benefit of kind of ongoing optimization and risk mitigation and so forth. Approaching your next renewal with IBM from a position of knowledge and so forth, and everything that comes with that. Also, part and parcel with this IASP program, there's the ability to use Flexera in lieu of ILMT as the subcapacity tool. And I think that option has been available on a very kind of one-off selective basis elsewhere, but now it's kind of really part of IASP, which is huge. You're going having duplicate tools and so forth. And then being able to leverage the tools and capabilities that we bring to the table to Elevate, and otherwise you get a level of expertise and efficiency that you won't be able to get otherwise. So again, that's and my recap of the benefits that are involved in that. Sanjay and I will open it to questions, and I have one. Let me go through the question, and Sanjay, I think the first one may be for you, which is what level of support does this initiative getting within IBM? Is it going to be a pilot that's going to go away, or something more permanent?
As I had said earlier, let me begin with first saying thank you for the question, and thank you, Ron. As I had mentioned in my statement earlier at the time of introduction, that this initiative as an alternative to license audits is not here to go away. It is sponsored by the chairman's office. It has the supports of the relevant senior vice presidents at IBM. The subject of client satisfaction is discussed on that table at IBM. Every element of that is taken through a weekly resolution process. So what you have heard about today is here to stay as an alternative. It'll only get more refined and improved with our clients' feedback. I hope that answers the question.
Yep, I think of that. Thanks, Sanjay. Another question is this offering available to all IBM customers? And if not, why not?
As I had said earlier, there is an existing process of how we think about our clients and where we are to go and conduct the software license audits or reviews. It's a pretty industrialized, mechanized process, but it has the human intervention of knowing which country with geography, who's being reviewed when, and what now requires to be done. Then you have a set of clients who may have said that we've just been reviewed and we haven't liked the experience and we want to talk to you, IBM. Then for such clients, it becomes an immediate invitation, because on one hand, they have expressed a source of dissatisfaction We're trying to address that. But we also must be mindful that the only predominant way to assess where what is deployed at a client has been the process that we have, alongside many other vendors or publishers in the industry, used over the past 15, 16 years, and that is through license audits. So we have to be careful how to allow for the two to coexist. But if a client raises their hand and says, we want to consider this as an offering, we would absolutely sit down with the customer and say, fine, let's go through the process and the engagement and answer the questions that you may have, and then help you engage with an IASP from one of the four that you have.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Sanjay. Another question I see here: does the client need to reconcile its IBM estate and true up before starting the ISP service and repeating the benefit and reaping the benefits of commercial pricing?
The short answer is no. This is not a hide and seek game on our part. This is not an encouraging our clients to persist in a behavior that they don't typically themselves adhere to. So if a client has an estate on an as-is basis, they have two options with IBM. One, which is the traditional option, wait for an audit. The other is, can we discuss this? And this is where we are. And right now we don't have ILMT installed. We don't know what we have. And we want to go down this path. Can we take advantage of whatever you have stated as benefits of this offering? The short answer is yes, of course.
Mm-hmm. Good. That's great. All right. I don't see any additional questions at this stage. I just want to highlight as well on this slide, you see the contact information for Sanjay and his team. So Sanjay has 3 direct reports that each own a region for North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific, and you have all the contact information as well as my contact information or anchor points on this slide as well. So feel free to contact either IBM or Anchor Point separately for any follow-on questions. And I think with that, I turn it back to Alex.
Awesome. Thank you, Sanjay and Ron, for that great presentation. Again, if you have further questions or would like to contact Sanjay and Ron, don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@anglepoint.com, or you can contact them directly using the information provided for you on this screen. And that is it from us. Thank you for attending today, and we will see you next time. Bye now.